Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, AI in Clinical Practice, Next Steps. My name is Julie Sufana, and I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at contextflow. And I'm really excited to be joined today by two AI and medical imaging experts, contextflow Chief Scientist and Co-founder Georg Clanks, and QUIBIM CEO and Co-founder Alberich-Bayarri. These gentlemen really have combined decades of experience in this domain, so I'm really grateful to both of you for being here. In dialogue with Georg and Angel beforehand, we really wanted to develop a webinar that would speak to the future of AI in radiology and specifically its use in daily clinical routine. Because, we have all seen articles about AI that really promises to solve everything. Maybe it's never been tested though in a clinical setting. So we just really wanted to give voice to the integrators who have actually made this transition from research to real life. And Georg and Angel have extensive firsthand experience on that subject. Please feel free to ask questions at any time. We're going to do our best to answer them in real time, but there'll also be an open Q&A after the presentation. So I encourage you to stay until the end and make the most of this opportunity to really engage with our speakers in regards to implementation in clinical practice and how they envision the future of radiology workflows. Just to get a quick idea of who is joining us today, I'm going to send out a question related to your area of expertise. If you could just let us know, you can select more than one option, what your function is, and that will help our speakers maybe cater some of their comments more in your direction. So let's see, okay. All right, so lots of people focused on research, it looks like. Okay, so largest group, guys, is research, followed by radiology and business development. Perfect, thank you for those answers. Good. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and give Georg Clanks the control, and he can talk about basically disease predictors and how we can use certain biomarkers to help us in the future. Georg, why don't you take it away?
Great, thanks a lot, Julie, for the introduction, and thanks everybody for joining this webinar today. My name is Georg Clanks. I'm a co-founder and chief scientist at contextflow. I'm also teaching at the Medical University of Vienna, where we are working on machine learning in medical imaging. And today I'd like to talk a bit about our experience, like more specifically going towards the practical experience in implementing AI algorithms, AI systems in clinical practice. I think all of you, as Julie said, you have experience and you know different results of what AI can do in theory and in a research setting. And today I'd like to talk a bit about our experience and how to take these research results, take these ideas that we have from research, and to actually implement them in clinical practice, and all the partnerships that come with that, all the collaborations, which I personally find really very exciting to work together across fields like computer science, radiology, technology, but also increasingly other disciplines that are relevant to diagnosis and to guiding treatment decisions. And so before I go a bit more into detail, I'd like to show a few slides that kind of outline our view or my personal view on the problems that we are trying to solve. So in general, a lot what we do with AI is trying to enable clinicians who are involved in diagnosis to better predict what is going to happen to a patient. So what is happening to a patient if we don't do anything? What is happening to a patient when we do something? And so one of the things, of course, we can do is if there is a specific treatment available, is this treatment the right treatment for the particular patient? Can I say something about the future of the patient, the risks without treatment, but also the possible outcomes with the treatment? And I think the really helpful things about machine learning is that, and that is actually, I think, one of the practical life values of machine learning, is that it helps us to integrate quite diverse and quite kind of challenging data in order to make these predictions. So we can fuse and bring together imaging data. I think you've heard a lot about genomics, fusing the information that we see on the phenotypical level, imaging lab values, patient records, with genomics, with clinical information, in order to say something about this future. And this is becoming more and more relevant, because what we observe while this technology is advancing and trying to get to a state where it's helpful, and I think it's getting helpful right now, is that we are seeing an increasing number of different treatment options and different disease variants that warrant different optimal treatments. And so I believe that this is the point where we need machine learning, not to automate things that we are doing already, but to enable us and to enable clinicians and radiologists to basically enhance the ability to support treatment decisions, to support decisions between like quite variety and a growing variety of possible treatment and patient management options. And so I think the place AI and machine learning can have is at this point where we have observations of a patient and we would like to inform the decisions about the future. And what we are also seeing is that for a while at ECR, the discussion was a lot about, well, radiologists versus AI. Will it be a conflict? Will it be something where one eventually will be better than the other? But I think right now the discussion is, I feel, much more mature. And I think the general understanding, and that is also the understanding that we share, is that in reality it will be something that will happen as a collaboration, as something where radiologists, where clinicians will use these tools in order to better provide information to treatment decisions, and in order to better kind of contribute to these increasingly interdisciplinary decisions that are at the basis of the treatment of individual patients. And with that in mind, I'd like today talk a bit about the practical things that we have learned mostly over the last couple of years when we are trying to do that in practice, when we're trying to perform or to translate algorithms that we have developed in theory, that we have validated and trained to clinical practice. And the three topics, and I'll touch each of them, is how can we integrate data in practice? So how can clinical sites, and very, very often it's a partnership between the groups or the companies or the research institutions who provide the machine learning technology, and the clinicians who are having the data, who are handling the data, and who are trying to organize the data. So how can we integrate data beyond imaging, but also within imaging for the training and for the validation? And we see that this is a big structuring exercise. The second point, I think that's one of the exciting phases right now, is what should the algorithms actually show to the clinician? Should they just show you a number or a bar plot, or should they actually show you the evidence that is at the basis of the predictions, of the diagnosis suggestions these software can produce? There it's really more and more, while these tools are moving beyond their very first versions, how can we integrate these tools into the clinical workflow? And they're the top questions I found that are coming up in the discussions between clinicians and us, is what's really relevant at that point. So is this information relevant because it will make a difference to the treatment of the patient? Or is it relevant because in research it helps us to understand a disease better? And how is what the artificial intelligence or machine learning can contribute actually complementary to what I know already at that point during a patient's journey through the healthcare system? And the third part, which I also find quite interesting and I think quite challenging, and I think that's again something that really can only be answered together, is how can we actually make a contribution to the decisions? And that is, of course, based on the first two parts, like what information do we show, but also how is this, where is the right place in the workflow of a clinician, of a radiologist, of someone who is integrated in diagnostic part of treating patients? Where is the right point for artificial intelligence to contribute? How can it be part of this workflow so that it doesn't create more time need, but rather reduces the time need, but actually kind of contributes the right piece of information at the right point in time? And I think that's an expectation that we have, how this eventually might change the workflow. And I think workflows are changing not only because of AI and machine learning, they're changing because of many other factors. By kind of, we see disciplines are merging, we're seeing more increased collaboration between laboratory, imaging, pathology. I think a lot of that is causing changes in the workflows, but I think one part of this change is the role of machine learning in these workflows. And so in the next couple of minutes, I'd like to give you a couple of examples of where I've viewed like the most important roles of AI, and then go into a bit more detail on the challenges and how we can solve challenges with integrating data for training and validation, and what we actually like to show and how we make AI tools part of workflows of radiologists. So what I found surprising, or what I found interesting in the last couple of years, is for a long time, like the sole role of AI was always, well, I give you some data and you give me a classification result. But we see now that more and more the role of the human in this loop, like the expert radiologist, is important. And sometimes the role of artificial intelligence is not so much to detect, but rather to improve the information that the radiologist is looking at in order to enhance and facilitate diagnosis and reading of this data. And so what you see here is an example of a chest radiograph. And here there are a couple of lesions in this data, but the most important point is that we can use artificial intelligence and machine learning in order to basically improve this imaging data, in order to improve the usefulness in its imaging data, because we can teach these algorithms to learn how this data is reconstructed, how it's coming about, and how to, for example, in this case, remove occlusion from the data in order to increase the visibility of critical findings. So that's one role of AI, improving the viewing experience for radiologists. Second one is, of course, integrating multimodal data. So that's an example where we can detect specific and relevant lesions, in this case, mammocarcinoma, by using machine learning to integrate data across different imaging modalities. And I think now it starts to get moving beyond what we know and expect and want to ask algorithms to perform, towards using algorithms to expand our ability to do diagnosis. So this is an example where we can use machine learning in order to identify new predictive and diagnostic patterns in lung images, which I think some of you might know. It's a quite difficult field because lung is a difficult volume, and the patterns that are caused by disease are very subtle deviations from healthy lung parenchyma pattern. And so it's important to understand how this change can happen, how this change correlates with disease. And so then the last example is that we can take that one step further and not only detect novel patterns in imaging data that might help us with diagnosis, but also look at entire populations and realize that there might be new groups of patients, new groups of diagnoses hidden in these populations that we can get out and extract with machine learning methods. And that is the area where contextflow is active most, turning this insight that we can view patient populations and identify groups of patients that behave in a very similar way, that show similar signs, that show similar patterns in the imaging data, even if these patterns don't have name, and use these models in order to say, well, this is my new patient. Does it look similar to a couple of other patients or to a cohort for whom I know that outcome, treatment response, diagnosis, things that are relevant for actually making good informed treatment decisions for my particular patient? And so the development of contextflow is all around how can we use this idea that the similarity between patients is important as the landscape of treatment and diagnosis gets more and more fine-grained. How can we use that insight and make it useful, not in form of a research paper, but in form of something that helps a radiologist within 10 or 20 seconds when they are at the point of care, when they are at the point of diagnosis, and try to say something about the patient that is in front of them with help of this massive population level data that allows them to relate their patient to cohorts of patients that we know. We've seen that, I think Marcus yesterday gave a quite good demo, and if you're interested in that a bit more, then please come to the booth and have a look at the live demo. What I'd like to do in the remaining talk is not to give you a live demo of the software, but to talk a bit about the learnings that we had on our way from the research insights towards getting a useful software, on our way together with the partners that we are working with the hospitals, with the radiology departments, of having the data in the routine system to having data that is useful for research and development. And also, and that's what I'll start with, what were our learnings in the COVID-19 pandemic and the last couple of months, where we learned that the software, how we viewed it, might be helpful on some specific points of care and points of diagnosis during COVID-19, but that involves a lot of very rapid adaptations of this software together with our clinical partners. And so I'd like to use the next 2 minutes to tell you a bit about our experience with how we pretty much changed a lot of the software in order to basically branch off a version that was helpful for diagnosing and assessing and treating COVID-19 patients, not so much by developing entirely new algorithms, but rather by pulling out algorithms and functionality that was living below the surface of the software and making it useful and making it kind of visible to the users. So the first in practice example will be how can we adapt to need? And what we found is that we provide image search, but what turned out to be valuable for the users during COVID and what really was happening in the background is that when we perform the search and compare patients, we do a very detailed analysis of the textures and the lung tissue patterns that are happening in each of these images, in each of the images in the knowledge base, in each of the images in the large cohorts that we are basing the software on. And so it turned out during COVID, what was most helpful in this very time pressure situation of very quickly getting a sense of a patient, of very quickly having to assess patterns that are fairly rare in other situations, is not so much search in the first place. Search comes afterwards during differential diagnosis, but just exposing the distributions of these disease patterns. So in this case, for example, ground glass opacities, where are these ground glass opacities in a patient? How much is there and how is it distributed? And it turned out we can do that, and that was the point that the users wanted in order to basically run an algorithm over all the patients that are coming in and performing a CT. So we learned the visualization and the quantification of these patterns was critical. The second critical thing was the fairly seamless integration into the hospital environment, where we don't want to open new software, we don't want to kind of jump from one workstation to another workstation in order to do that, but where we want to really, as soon as the scan is taken, the data is run through a virtual machine and a report is available, and that led to a report that is now in place in centers across of Europe that use this functionality to just parse CT data, get quantitative values of how much of which patterns is present there and how it is distributed. And it turns out that's really helpful. And that is what a lot of people actually wanted in order to quickly assess these patients. Now we know that we might, of course, have shifted for quite some time from a pure screening situation to a more differential diagnosis situation, because we know the testing, the false positives, false negatives rates still make imaging necessary in some cases. And so I think what is happening now is a shift towards more kind of a prognosis a role of these types of softwares. And I'd just like to point out that we are part of a very large multi-center study across Europe, where the goal is to use imaging data across centers in order to understand how we can predict individual severity, individual treatment need for patients suffering from COVID, but also suffering from other respiratory infectious diseases. And that means that this software is rolled out across these places. So this was one kind of, in a nutshell, example how very quick iterations and user feedback gave us the chance to adapt software very targeted to the need of individual users for a specific use case. The types of things that we learned, but also the types of things that I think are around and that we've known for some time, and that I think we are moving to a state where we understand how to handle that, is how can we actually implement AI in practice. And I think the three big building blocks of what we and the users and the researchers actually, because many of the users are researchers as well, are learning is, first of all, AI has to get better. And that means we need to use data that is in the clinical routine, that is recorded in the clinical routine, to train and validate AI, especially across sites, in order to get robust and stable. AI has to grow into the workflow. So the first iteration is really a suggestion where then iteratively with the partner sites, with the clinicians, we learn more and more how and where the exact place of the AI is and of these tools is. And the third point, and I think that's an exciting point, is that as the role of radiologists and experts that are working for diagnosis changes, becomes more interdisciplinary, becomes a much more connected field and discipline of using data, imaging data, but also data beyond the imaging data in order to perform diagnosis and treatment guidance. We also have to learn how these roles change and what of these changes are enabled by artificial intelligence. To be very specific, in the last couple of minutes, one of the initially we thought, well, data is easy because we have the data and it's there and we just need to use it for training. I think many of you and us learned that it's actually quite tricky to get data from hospital systems that is actually useful for training because of many barriers, but also because of many considerations that we have to take in order to make models that are built on top of this data actually effective and accurate and robust to fulfill needs. And one thing that I found very helpful there I really recommend, if you have 15 minutes, to have a look at Ben Glocker's talk at this ECR in the session E120. Ben Glocker from Imperial College talked about causality, about biases in data, and he, together with Hugh Harvey, have a publication out which I think offers a very helpful view on the different quality levels of data. So when we start from the bottom, that's the data that we have in the clinic. We know there is data, but we don't really know how much data there is. We know that it should be available, but we don't know about the quality, about the reasons it was acquired for. One step that we have to make is actually extract it from the clinical system into the research system. And there are questions like what formats, what study protocols, how to ensure the security of this data are really relevant and are totally non-trivial. But I think we are moving more and more towards solving them together with the clinicians. The second one is a set of questions that everybody has to ask of the data. Is it structured and does it actually hold the relevant information? And is this information the result of the disease and the diagnosis, or is this information maybe even the result of certain conventions within a certain site? And the third and last, I think, and difficult question is it actually the right data for my question? And is there selection bias hidden in the data that makes the data very well suited for a particular question, but maybe very poorly suited for another question? And COVID was another example where we learned a lot that data that's being collected in screening settings is great to train algorithms for screening, but we need different data in order to train algorithms that are good for differential diagnosis and prognosis and treatment guidance of severe cases. So these are the questions that you have to ask yourself. How can we from the start ensure that we use the time in order to collect the data that is actually helpful for the particular problem? And we understand more and more how to do that, and I think it's a good learning experience between the clinical partners and the technology providers. And one thing that and I'm almost at the end of the talk, that we are realizing, of course, is that machine learning in clinical environment isn't really something static. So we are not done once we have a well-working system, but really it's a continuous problem. It's something where machine learning will have to evolve and co-develop with changing imaging technologies, with changing diseases, with changing treatment options. So I would recommend to look at the problem of training not as kind of a single shot training where you have a model and that's it, but rather as a continuous task where we have to find methods. And this paper by Hoffmanning and Perconi that is coming out at this year's MICA 2020 is one example where algorithms kind of adapt to changing data environments. And so with having that in mind, we have the data, we understand that data is something that is dynamic, that is something that is changing as technology changes, but also as the treatment options changes. We understand the roles of AI better and better because we understand we can use it for the detection and classification, for the quantification, but also for supporting difficult diagnostic decisions, difficult assessments of individual patients in order to ultimately aid the treatment. But the key is that whatever of these kind of directions we are part of, the challenge is to build these tools into the workflow, and that is always an iterative approach, like we saw in COVID-19. But what we're also seeing now that the software is running in multiple centers, that we have to learn where is the right contribution, what is the right way to show the information that AI is generating to the clinicians, to the radiologists, and then iterate the software, but also give the workflows a chance to adapt to the new software. And I think one keyword that I found very relevant in this discussion came up over and over again when we are talking to radiologists and clinicians is the idea of value-based medicine, where tools and actions and services are really assessed by what type of value they contribute to the individual patient's journey and healthcare. And I think that is a good perspective to also view the value of AI solutions and the AI software in this context. There is the value that we can contribute to diagnosis, to treatment decisions as part of a group of experts and algorithms that actually generate evidence and generate the basis for good and solid decisions. And with that, thank you for your attention, and I'm looking forward to questions and also to the discussion at the end of the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Georg. Maybe leave your slides up for a couple of minutes in case we have some other questions coming in. I just wanted to ask something that we always get at conferences or on other talks is, where do you get your data from? So maybe talk a little bit about the data that we're using.
Sure. So the data is coming from clinical partners. Basically from clinical routine. And that means that together with them, we kind of curate and select and collect the data so that it's useful as part of this knowledge base, as part of this body of evidence. And we found that actually centers are quite motivated to contribute the data because it means diverse data that is coming from many centers and also from the centers that are actually using the software ensures that this knowledge base, the evidence that is at the basis of the models, is representative for the cases that they are looking at. And so one part of that means data using for building the models, but the other part is also, of course, showing this data as the evidence that is at the base of the decision. So in short, the data is coming from clinical routine, from the clinical partners who are co-developing and who are using this software in order to make it useful for them.
Great, thank you. Okay, so I have some other questions. I'm gonna make sure that we have enough time for everything at the end. So let me switch this over to Angel. And there we go, perfect. And sir, go ahead and take it away.
Thank you. Can you hear me well, Julie?
I can hear you, yes.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you, Julie, for the and contextflow and Georg. I mean, I'm so glad to be here. It's a great pleasure for me to be able to share our view on seamless AI. And by seamless, we understand on real integration of AI in clinical routine, right? So I would like to discuss on how we understand, formerly in my research environment, in my research group, but lately also in our company, in QUIBIM. So how we understand AI at the patient level, also on data integration. So it goes without saying that we are in the era of analytics, also in radiology, and therefore these analytics have been mainly fostered by the integration of AI among us. So from our understanding, AI is to data what electricity was to industry and communications. So we will review the applications of AI at the very single patient level, also how to use it for data integration, and finally for biomarker discovery, and we will end with some conclusions. And I would like to have the chance probably to show you some real implementations. So at the patient level, AI, and more specifically CNNs, the convolutional neural networks, have been fundamental to dramatically increase the performance in different tasks in medical imaging when we compare to traditional computer vision algorithms. These are what we understand as the three main applications of AI, and one of them is the image reconstruction. And all of us know that today machines are already using deep learning for the reconstruction of data with less dose, with less signal to noise ratio, and to obtain similar image quality with less acquisition time, so benefit for the patient. Also regarding detection and classification, we have been using this technology also to integrate the outputs with the work list prioritization, for example. And here we understand both the classification of the images into different categories, kind of end-to-end AI, and also the detection, because we can either have the bounding boxes or we can have the heat maps to detect different findings as in the image, right, that we have here. And finally, we have seen as well a dramatic change in the way we segment the images and the way we detect the organs and the tissues. And honestly, it was very difficult to address some of the challenges in segmentation before convolutional neural nets. And now it's been possible, and we have had the possibility to accelerate the extraction of imaging biomarkers. No? Indeed, segmentation is what we understand that enables seamless AI. So before the discovery of imaging biomarkers, we know that today we are extracting a lot of features. No? We have radiomics features, we have imaging biomarkers, most of them are functional as well, but we still don't know what are going to be used for. Right? We still don't know the real killer clinical application. And we understand that before this discovery process, these are key to accelerate, the segmentation is key to accelerate the feature extraction pipelines in research. Because in most image analysis pipelines, the main bottleneck remaining was segmentation at all. So we imagine, for example, liver fat analysis in MRI. We all knew how to draw regions of interest manual in a region of the liver and to extract the fat fraction or the iron concentrations. But unless we did that region of interest and unless we did that interaction, it was not possible at all. So right now, if you can perform, thanks to AI and convolutional neural nets with technologies like deep supervision, for example, if you can do an automated segmentation of that and then have all the extraction of data, then you can go massive. You can extract that for a huge amount of patients. So this is before discovery. Let's be automated, let's be seamless to gather as much data as possible. And after the discovery, once we know that a given biomarker has a specific clinical application, then segmentation is key to accelerate imaging biomarkers analysis in clinical routine. And these are some examples of the different segmentation outputs underlying most of our analysis pipelines in our platform. So we are using CNNs for prostate segmentation with a very detailed, not going for whole gland, but going also to seminal vesicles, peripheral zone, also fat, subcutaneous, visceral, muscle, brain lesions as well. And we can see how the CNNs have improved traditional computer vision. We can see these brain lesions, how are segmented, and this periventricular hyperintensity, which is physiologic, is normal. It is not segmented at all, no? And this was very challenging in traditional analysis algorithms. Then we have liver and other regions such as cartilage. We have a strong background in MR, although we do also some applications in X-ray and CT. No? Even if, let's say that we can analyze patient data, the integration of AI models and analysis pipelines in clinical routine is not straightforward. So today we can say that integration is the main bottleneck for the introduction of AI analysis of images at a massive scale level. So basically running on background, happening while we speak, when we are in our departments. And therefore, this is why we decided to develop a platform to visualize, annotate, analyze kind of report and discover and provide a seamless AI approach. But what we understand by seamless approach, so this is a conventional workflow in any of the hospitals we know, where we do have the patients with the clinicians, and in this cycle, the image is going to radiology, radiology reporting, and reporting going back to the clinician. But then let's add this seamless parallel pipeline in which, without noticing anything, we will take the images plus the relevant data, perform all the post-processing tasks, and send back information in a way of quantitative reporting. No? So in the end, we have this enhanced report, the qualitative plus the quantitative information. That's why we understand as seamless, what we understand as seamless in seconds, having the results of the analysis completely done. No? This is an example of how we understand seamless AI as well. You can see here, this is the automated rules. Oh, sorry, I just want to click in pause. This is the automated rules engine we have. So every 5 minutes, we can verify whether there is a new prostate study with a T2 fast spin echo with a slice thickness lower than 3 millimeters, and let's put that action to analyze with our prostate solution, right? So this is a way to be continuously checking for these different rules, as we have in the email, for example. If the email was sent to this address, do this action. So if we have this kind of solutions implemented, then together with automated algorithms, we can perform seamless AI analysis. No. However, the platform also, we think that the radiologists working in the AI environment need to have full control on all the steps. And this is why we allow to modify the annotations. We think that the different users have to be able to edit the masks, to register the annotations of every user. And this is why we have the user management profile, for example. And also regulatory agencies make strong restrictions on the fact that the radiologist must, even if the pipeline of AI is completely automated, radiologists need to be able to go at every single step of the process and introduce any manual modification, any manual change, no? And also build the reports with the support, no, by themselves. We will go to this later. In QUIBIM, we have installed already this seamless AI approach in more than 70 hospitals, and we are working already extracting a massive amount of data in clinical routine. And regarding the use, also in the discovery of new biomarkers, of new ideas, we are using also the solution in a kind of multi-center research projects, multi-center solutions. We are as well managing the data in a COVID-19 initiative. It's the Imaging COVID-19 EU. But I wanted to highlight that beyond imaging, we must be open in our different platforms and solutions to integrate not only imaging data, as we can see here from the segmentation, radiomics features, but also we have to design the architectures to be multi-scale, and this is why we understand we have to integrate multi-scale model approach. So this is an example of a project for neuroblastoma and DIPG tumors that is highly translational in cancer. And we're integrating not only the angiogenesis and cell density properties using techniques like diffusion MRI, perfusion MRI, textures, and MIBG acquisitions, but also cell growth models and also molecular models of drug cell interaction. And the goal is to build this kind of integrative AI models to predict health outcomes, no? And to discuss whether the tumor will grow, the tumor will just reduce the size, or also try to predict other clinical endpoints such as survival, for example. So, but definitely the most interesting for going from the seamless AI to discover new knowledge is this workflow we can see in this diagram, no? In which we have the patient. If we put together a lot of patients and a lot of image acquisitions and a lot of data with imaging biomarkers analysis, then we can perform a statistics-based analysis, and this is the area that we understand as biomarkers discovery. So we can perform data reduction and classification, and to study from a group the relationship with the clinical endpoints, no? And then go back to the patient to try to help that patient in clinical routine according to the conclusions we have extracted from the group. And for that, it is very important that all our solutions include not only advanced statistical methods, not only supervised and non-supervised classifiers, but also the appropriate solutions for visual analytics, no? In the end, human is visual, and we need that kind of things. This is an example of a group study on rectal cancer, comparison of consolidation therapy with radiotherapy plus chemo. It's a new treatment branch, short, versus the traditional long cycle chemoradiotherapy with MR, no? And we can see between baseline and follow-up in the tumor features how we have changes, and how we can clusterize the patients that we have here in these different columns in different disease phenotypes. And we can see relevant findings like fractal dimension of the tumor. From this analysis in the group, we can see that it is a very good predictor of relapse in the tumor, no? So we think that we have not only to end up in the analysis using AI of a single patient, but we have to go to try to extract new knowledge that may benefit future patients, no? And this is a clear example of how we, for example, can have patients, the respective data for different texture features, and we can see entropy, kurtosis, skewness, and 2 columns, the pre-treatment, post-treatment. And we can see also in this way, and this is a module we developed with the University of Constance, because we want to empower the radiologists to do research easily. And this is how we can analyze the evolution of the longitudinal evolution of oncological patients in the course of the disease. And we can see how we can clusterize these patients, no, according to the longitudinal changes in the end of the different chemotherapy cycles. So just as takeaways, we understand that the progress in the AI applications, such as image reconstruction, as we have seen, detection, classification, and segmentation, has allowed us to automate the image analysis process at a patient level. But patient level is not enough. So we want to discover new insights. So we require seamless AI integration, as less clicks as possible, optimally 0 clicks. That's why we have the 0-click philosophy from the seamless AI. And also that the combined supervised and unsupervised AI classifiers together with advanced visual analytics techniques will allow us to identify new disease phenotypes, no? And now, in my remaining time, I would like to share some visual ideas on how to implement this in real application. This is how we understand our platform environment. I'm sorry for that sound. This is a typical navigator of studies, and this is actually a configuration environment. It is not mandatory to open it because we have this rules engine, as we know, and we can predefine different rules. This is, for example, a rule for X-rays. So we can say, okay, every time we see in the PACS chest X-ray with a digital radiology and it's frontal, then let's do an action of launch chest X-rays classifier, for example. Or every time we have a brain MR with a 3D-T1 with a slice thickness lower than 1 millimeter, then let's launch a brain atrophy screening and a motor cortex. And this runs completely automated. And this is why we decided to embed different apps. No, so we have the apps that can be executed in a seamless approach, and every app has different requirements. No, these are the different modules developed by us in the course of the company, and some examples. No, all have the different philosophies. So, for example, if we want to go to a chest race classification, we can either open the viewer or we can directly go to the results here. So we can see the heat map that has given the highest weight to the abnormal probability value. Every single analysis, regardless of the app, can be built in a on-the-fly quantitative structure report. So we can see here, for example, the findings in this chest race, but we can go also to other image analysis solutions. So we can go, for example, to cartilage segmentation. Oh, sorry, I think it's knee that I have here. And we can see, for example, the results on the AI-assisted morphology analysis, no, with the parcellation of the cartilage, the thickness in different regions, and we can as well build this report. No, sorry because of the Adobe, no, but in the end, the philosophy is to build these reports on the fly. No, also, if we perform a massive number of analyses with the different apps, as we were saying before, we think that we need to empower the radiologists to do research, and this is why we can connect the apps to the database. So we can see, for example, results here on all the brain data we have from different patients. This is, for example, in my account here. So I can say, okay, let me plot, for example, age versus gray matter volume. And the graphs are dynamic. So, for example, I can say, okay, let me put from 18 years old to 99 years old. And what I see in the table is what I see in the graph, in the picture here. We can add kind of trend lines. We can split, for example, by gender and say, okay, let me see the evolution of male and females. No, we can do this for other algorithms. So, for example, any chest race classification, for example, we can do kind of basic analysis, saying, okay, imagine we have thousands of patients. No, we can say, okay, let me plot sex versus the cardiomegaly probability and what's happening with the different patients I have analyzed. And also, for example, as we were showing before on cancer, no, we can have patients. Every patient can have 2 time points, and we can see all the radiomics features. So we have kind of visual analytic solutions to say, okay, let me plot the differences, let me select different imaging biomarkers, and let me non-supervisedly clusterize those patients to see, for example, oh, I have this cluster that has a higher staging of the tumor, and probably we would need to combine this with genomics data to have more strength in the non-supervised classification. No? And it is mandatory as well to allow the users to download all the database that they are mining or they are looking for in CSV files or Excel files, no, for example. So basically, this is what I wanted to highlight and to show to you today, no, how to go seamless, how to extract information in clinical routine. This is a solution already embedded in different hospitals, more as an engine than as a user interface that you have to use on a daily basis, but as a automated rules engine that will do the work for you. Let's put it that way. Okay. So thank you, and I think right now we can, move to Julie. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Angel, for that really interesting presentation. Now I know a lot more about what you guys are doing. You guys, attendees, feel free to type in some questions to us. I have a couple, and this can go for both Georg and Angel. So I receive a lot of messages through, let's say, LinkedIn or social media about radiologists interested in either learning about AI, maybe some programming, or actually wondering if it's worth their while, to put it in their words, to switch from a career in radiology actually to developing these types of tools. And I would be interested in knowing what your thoughts are on that. Maybe Georg, you can start.
Sure. Yeah. So yeah, I think that's a very good question. From what we see and what we live with our colleagues, it's I think something that is has caught the interest of many of the young and also like radiologists who are interested in these tools. And so I think one way to be involved is actually to collaborate closely with computer scientists, with machine learning experts. But I see now more and more that radiologists also start to code. So something that did not happen so much some years ago, but now since the toolboxes and the libraries are actually manageable, people start to code in Python, start to use PyTorch or TensorFlow, whatever library they're interested in, and actually produce pretty cool solutions. So I think it's really worth the while to get into the topic, and I think it's totally feasible to be integrated with working groups and to have kind of this close exchange. What I definitely know is that for all of the projects that are really exciting, almost all of the time they are exciting when people with a radiology background and people with computer science background work closely with each other. So not like meeting once every 2 months, but really working on a day-to-day basis with each other, and then ideas come from both directions. And also that means that radiologists start to code and start to develop in Python. I think that makes sense. So I think, yeah, I see it very positively.
Angel, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think that also it's a really, really good question, right? And honestly, I think that we are living the paradigm shift right now from what we understand as radiologists, no, and as obviously reporting, imaging examinations, to go to a point in which we are not discussing on radiology or pathologists, but we are discussing on diagnostic specialists or kind of centralized department in the hospitals, more focused on the clinical scenarios rather on the on these clinical specialties like pathology or radiology, for example, right? If we imagine a department called diagnostic department and we have diagnostic specialists, I am sure we will have more diagnostic specialists focused in the radiology part, and definitely we will have some of them with data science background, because even if not high skills in Python programming, I'm sure because of the willingness of some radiologists and the capabilities of some radiologists on learning programming languages, on the packages and libraries like Georg was saying right now, put more or less basic or moderate AI skills at their fingertips, no? And I think that obviously we will continue to have highly skilled data scientists, highly skilled engineers working in all the post-processing, but we will have as well part of the radiologists. I do not expect a high percentage, but definitely some of them, I mean, will go through this process of acquiring data science skills, even at a programming level.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have a radiologist on staff, and she is a great bridge to being able to explain, you know, the AI that our company is doing with the radiologists that we're working with in clinical routine. So for any radiologists out there, if you're wondering, would a company really, could they use my skills? Absolutely. And if there's anyone that you find interesting, I should say, then please don't hesitate to reach out, because there's a lot of companies that would love to have your expertise. Another question, so in regards to when you are implementing these tools with radiologists in a hospital setting, what has been the most surprising to them? Like, what are kind of their reactions? Maybe things that didn't go exactly as they expected. I would be interested in knowing kind of what your experiences, things that they've said were. So this time I'll start with Angel.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, in our experience, what the radiologists have valued most is the fact of being completely automated. So they have to do nothing, but if they want to do it, they are capable of, so they can enter into the solution and just do what they want. And also the fact that we can empower them to do research, because, you know, I think due to the high workload in radiology, radiology also has a research crisis. No, I guess most of radiologists would like to do more research than their current workload allows them to do. So we wanted to make so easy to gather a database of quantitative information and then prepare a paper, perform statistic analysis, and that honestly this kind of data mining capabilities, empowering them to do research is what is more surprising to them, together with the seamless AI concept.
And Georg?
Yeah, I agree with Angel, and I think a lot of that we also observed, like, first of all, this very high interest of radiologists in doing research and in using the tools, not only for clinical practice, I mean, that's definitely important, but also for research projects, and being very curious about kind of expanding what you can get out of imaging data in order to do diagnosis, in order to support decisions with these tools. And I think the second thing that was very striking and came from many of those with whom we tried the tools and who looked at it and who gave us suggestions how to improve was that when machine learning produces a prediction or a value or whatever outcome, what they really like is to see the evidence for that and to see why the model came to that conclusion, in order to give them the chance to understand, first of all, of course, the robustness and accuracy and quality check of the model, but also to kind of enrich what is coming out of the model with the evidence, with the basis for the model predictions or for the suggestions of diagnosis. So I think making visible the evidence and making visible what's happening in the model so that people can trust them because they understand what is the reason for predictions is something that was initially a bit surprising, but now I think I understand why that's relevant and why it's going to be why it will stay relevant, even if the tools work very reliably, more and more reliably. I think providing the evidence for the decisions will always stay relevant in order to enable them to also bring that into the discussions with other disciplines in the hospital when it is about deciding what to do with a specific patient.
Yeah, and that's really relevant to pretty much everyone in the audience today, right? Regardless of your function. So if you're working in business development, how do you talk to the radiologists or the clinicians that are interested in these tools and being able to show what the benefits are and set their expectations correctly so that neither of you is disappointed? If you are a radiologist or a clinician, you know, it's really important to know which questions to ask of AI vendors so that you are selecting the correct tools that are really going to help you, and again, so that you understand what you're actually going to receive versus what maybe expectations you had that just actually are not yet feasible. A lot of things with the AI are coming, but they're not quite exactly maybe where you want them to be. And of course, if you're doing R&D or development, like as both of our companies are, that's also really important to be able to bake in, okay, like what are the radiologists using our tools actually saying, and how can I make this easier for them or more seamless? So with that, I think we've come to the end. I'd really like to thank both Georg and Angel for joining and giving us such brilliant presentations. And of course, you, the audience, thank you so much for joining. I really encourage you to check out our websites, our social media, follow us. If you have any questions, feel free to send us emails or a shout out, a tweet, whatever. You can reach us in multiple ways. And again, I really thank everyone for your attention today. Hopefully this will be the first of many webinars, and enjoy the rest of your day. If you're attending ECR, enjoy the rest of your conference. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Julie. Thanks a lot, Angel. Thanks,
Thank you.
everybody.
Thank you,
Thank
Julie.
you. Till next time. Bye.